I know you all also think very deeply about not just the professional profile of your graduates, but also the character profile and the intellectual profile of the people coming out of your schools. And I know that thinking traces all the way back to very, very early childhood. You're very intentional about the through lines that you're setting between what a 2-year-old does at a guidepost school and what a 16-year-old's doing in their high school classroom, and how that's going to translate to their adult lives, not just as people in the workforce, but as humans. Can you talk a little bit about some of the most important values that you've set around what you want your graduates to be, but also some of these through lines and markers that you're tracking for over the course of a child's education?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the outcomes for our own schools, so not necessarily our teachers in training, but the students who go through, whether they stay with us for 3 years in Children's House or they come to us in Nido in our infant room and stay through high school, um, it really goes back to where I started with Montessori, and with her early recognition that there were things that were healthy and normal for children as they develop. And a lot of what we talk about promoting or what we try and support in our students is normal development. Um, and we talk about normal development sort of the way Montessori did, as an increasing progression of more and more capability in the world, capability to act and to move and to do things in the world that are sort of appropriate to each developmental plane. Um, and so as we think about what that looks like, what a normal, healthy child development looks like, that's when sort of the through line of the values that we base our education around comes in. And so at Guidepost, we talk a lot about the values of work, of knowledge, of agency, and of humanism. Um, and really that roots back to and is enabled through a Montessori approach to education. So, if we look at what it means to instill a love of work in a child from the very earliest age, and it's Montessori uses the term work a lot, and she uses it starting in infancy. So an infant who is focusing on a black and white Montessori mobile, because what they're capable of perceiving at this young age is just black and white, is just contrast, right? Is working. That act of focusing for 10 or 15 minutes as a very young infant is the work of that infant. Now, that's not work for a 16-year-old, but that's age-appropriate work for the 3 or 6-month-old. And as they grow, that ability to focus or to work continues to develop, right? Whether it's the mirror polishing of the 2-year-old or learning to put on their own shoe or their own jacket, all of these things that require them to build increasing capacity in their body, in their mind, in their ability to act in the world. But what instilling a love of work does for them is instill a positive relationship with effort and sort of an understanding of effort reward, right? That I learn how to tie my shoe by getting it wrong a lot of times. And it's not a conscious lesson that the child is given at 2. It is a conscious lesson they're given at 12. At 2, they're not told you have to fail at walking 12 times before you succeed. They're just driven to walk. And so if they're given an environment where they are allowed to fail to put on their shoe for 5 minutes until they get it on the foot completely, they will persevere. What we need to do is set up the environment so they have the time, they have the bench that's small enough for them, they have access to their shoes. They're sort of given permission to struggle. As we get older and our brains start working more consciously, then it becomes more of a conversation with a student around recognizing that the reason they were able to do that complicated math problem or analyze that primary source in history or write beautiful cursive is because they tried. They worked very hard at it. They put forth a lot of effort and they saw rewards. And so there's a very conscious emphasis on work throughout the classroom. And that culture of work goes hand in hand with what we call a culture of knowledge. And that's really a sense that information matters, that what we teach, and this sort of goes hand in hand with the stepping out into the world, that what they're learning is important, that it matters if it's true or not. And it's interesting, just like the toddler doesn't have to be convinced to work, right? Like if you ever watch a young child learning to walk, if we had to do something that physically hard, we would be completely overwhelmed. Like, can you imagine falling that often and getting up and falling and getting up? It's incredible, but they're driven to walk. As they get into elementary, they sort of have that same drive intellectually. So an elementary child, just like the early child, the young child is sort of independently or unconsciously driven to grow physically, the elementary child is driven to grow intellectually. And so they can sort of fall down and get things wrong and keep getting up again and trying again and moving because they have this sort of drive to see what their minds are capable of. And then as they get to adolescence, it becomes more of a conscious conversation. Elementary children have this sort of instinct for wanting to know if something is true or real. Like it matters. It just instinctively matters. And that's sort of the love of knowledge that we want to keep alive into adolescence, right? That we don't engage in a Socratic discussion on the nature of free will as a game or to see whose speech is the strongest or as a debate, within the confines of a classroom, but because it would change how we act in the world. It would change the nature of the world. It would have consequences on how we think about other people, how we think about ourselves, how we run our societies. And so a value of knowledge is really a deep down commitment to the idea that it matters if things are true or not, if things are real or not. It matters in the real world. It is of practical, tangible value. And so a lot of what we build or what we try and build and support in our schools and in our graduates is that culture of work and knowledge and that sort of normal person graduate who goes out into the world with a work ethic rooted in a love of work and a real value of and reverence for knowledge.